In 2023, there was big news. Dredging will start again at the mouth of the Murray River, Australia's largest river, after a break. The goal is to clear out the piled-up sand from the river mouth and surrounding channels, allowing water and fish to move freely from the river to the ocean. Also, this helps avoid floods. They've been doing this since 2002. They kept digging up the river mouth again and again until the work was stopped by flooding in 2022. But Australia can't just let the river be and allow it to flow naturally. The river just isn't in good shape. According to the experts, a healthy river takes care of its basin by itself, but the Murray is always piling up extra sand. If dredging is stopped, the mouth of the sea will just close up, and the nearby national park will face massive environmental problems. Do you think the idea of digging up a river where there's already a river sounds strange to you? How about digging an ocean in the ocean? Let's start by figuring out what dredging actually is. Usually, this word means digging up the seabed, removing sediment, and dumping it elsewhere. In other words, material is taken out of one spot by digging with some big buckets or simply sucked up under high pressure. Everything raised from the bottom is dumped somewhere else, either in deeper waters like far out in the ocean or in shallower areas. Basically, it's where people try to create new land in place of the sea or a body of water. This is a typical method, nothing new about it. However, Australian ecologists are just livid. The thing is, they're doing work in the area of the Great Barrier Reef, the largest coral reef system in the world, spanning over 1,430 miles. Most of the reef is under the protection of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park because it's a one-of-a-kind ecosystem, a natural wonder and all that. Ecologists argue that the material resulting from digging the ocean is toxic. Furthermore, it'll be thrown right onto the reef, which is incredibly vulnerable even without any digging. Builders disagree. None of these claims are accurate. The material they're digging up is just sand, silt, and clay, and it'll be dumped on the bare seafloor with no corals involved. It might seem like you can breathe easy, but that doesn't mean the project won't hurt the reef. There are a few serious buts. For many species and ecosystems, corals, seagrass, dugongs, turtles, and fish, including sharks, the situation's really bad, and the reef is already in trouble. Even if the material itself is harmless, ecologists worry that the sediment will make the water murkier. Murky water means fewer nutrients for organisms that need sunlight. First of all, that's corals, and also seagrass. Overall, if the dredging isn't carried out with extreme care, almost as if it's in the middle of a shop full of antique Chinese porcelain, the reef might be seriously damaged. But if you work carefully, the project won't have a significant impact on the ecosystem. I didn't come up with this myself. This is what they found by gathering results from 16 ecological studies. As if you can, trust them? Unfortunately, there have been cases where similar projects led to less than pleasant outcomes. In 2019, the Marine Pollution Bulletin published a study saying that the dredging project in the Miami port could have led to the death of over 500,000 corals. Environmental reports suggest the opposite, but researchers from the University of Miami double-checked all the collected independent data and were horrified. In regions near the dredging, there was a more significant increase in sediment coverage. The sediment covered between 50 and 90% of the nearby reefs, and as I mentioned, this prevents corals from feeding and reproducing, and even attaching to a solid surface, which caused widespread coral death. Originally, they wrote it off as a coral disease outbreak, but it's kind of suspicious that the corals that died were exactly those closest to the digging site, don't you think? However, what's done is done. And what's the point of even digging up the ocean? Like in Miami, it all comes down to ports. In Australia, it all started with the plan to expand the coal terminal at Abbott Point in Queensland. To make the place deeper, they decided to dig up about 5 million tons of sediment from the seabed and then dump all of it 15 miles away. It's all for convenience. Abbott Point is basically just a pier sticking out far into the sea, and they want to turn it into one of the largest coal ports in the world. But for that, they need the right conditions. Large ships need a certain depth to enter a port, otherwise they'll just run aground. That's when it's time for dredging work. Basically, they're making a way for the ships and setting up something like a comfortable parking spot. Dredging operations are just routine, something you'd find everywhere there are big ports and harbors. It's a crucial part of many port activities and marine infrastructure growth, so Australia's desire to change the seabed a little isn't strange at all. In recent years, many Australian ports have undergone significant dredging. It was necessary to develop coastal infrastructure because sea exports of resources have increased a lot. This is especially true for ports in northern Australia. It's predicted that the demand for dredging will grow even more with the rise in global maritime trade, which will involve large vessels. So that means they'll dig even deeper and more often. Port Abbott Point is the northernmost deepwater coal port in Australia, located about 15 miles northwest of the town of Bowen in Queensland. Right now, it's, to be honest, a small port. It consists of a railroad loading station, coal handling and storage areas, and a single trestle pier. A port with one pier. That's just not serious. But if it were to be expanded, and they still managed to complete it. From May 2006 to July 2010, the work included structural, mechanical, and electrical manipulations. Over 9,500 tons of structural steel were installed and more than 205 piles were driven. Later, the terminal got approval for adding a second dock and a ship loading machine, as well as an extra shore warehouse and machinery. But then the work was postponed due to a reduction in coal production at the Carmichael mine. By the way, the environmentalists criticized it too, and also because of the negative impact on the Great Barrier Reef. And they're still against dredging because they need to remove over 35 million cubic feet of sand, silt, and everything else. But what can you do if this is the only possible option? Or is it? Apparently not. And the ecologists even have suggestions. For example, at Abbott Point, you can avoid dredging altogether by building a long pier in deeper water. Why dig when you can just park the ship farther out? Unfortunately, to the great dismay of experts, this option was rejected. The decision was made to do everything as fast and as cheap as possible for the builder. Nobody really thought about what price the environment would pay. But there's some good news. Until 2015, all the dredged material was dumped back into the waters of the Great Barrier Reef. But in 2015, they finally made it official that this is prohibited. Now all the material left after dredging has to be disposed of on land. By the way, they were dumping the soil left after dredging into the ocean for 100 years. So this is a really big step. Ever wondered what happens if you don't dig the bottom? Here's a fresh example from June 2024. This is the 262-foot ship Baltic Arrow, and it faced some real trouble on the River Nene when it was headed to the port of Wisbech in Cambridgeshire. The river section had just silted up, and the ship got stuck completely. Other boat owners have long expressed concern that no dredging is done in this area. As a result, the section of the river gets choked with silt and becomes unusable from early April to mid-June. Even small boats run aground, let alone a big one loaded with timber. When a ship accidentally runs aground, it might be necessary to remove the vessel or its cargo, if possible. This is done for various reasons, such as to be able to send the ship to a repair dock, or to prevent it from sinking under the weight of the cargo, or to save the cargo, or to save everything else from the cargo. Some ships carry hazardous materials that could seriously harm the environment. In short, there are many reasons. But for any ship to run aground, it's very bad, including from a financial point of view. For example, on March 23, 2021, the 1,300-foot cargo ship Ever Given, one of the largest in the world, ran aground during strong winds right in the middle of the Suez Canal. The damage amounted to around $1 billion. To free the ship from the sandbank, they had to excavate 1 million cubic feet of sand and use 13 tugboats. This took 6 days, during which global supply chains were disrupted, and the halt in trade led to a loss of nearly $10 billion. It's clear that you don't have to fear such a large-scale incident in Australia. After all, it's not the Suez Canal. However, in this area, around 120 million tons of coal are transported annually through the coral reef system. So if something gets blocked here by a ship running aground, the damage would still be significant. And then there are pirates. I always get surprised when I say this. After all, it's the 21st century. However, a vessel that runs aground really becomes an easy target for pirates. For example, this happened in the Persian Gulf in 2021. An Iraqi military ship ran aground and was suddenly attacked. The pirates then demanded a ransom of $80,000. Keep in mind that Australia is a country where economic growth relies heavily on maritime trade. Any kind of piracy is a big issue for it, and especially if ships begin running aground. You might argue Australia can't compare to the Persian Gulf. However, from the infamous Batavia Mutiny in 1629 to the capture of the oil tanker Petro Ranger by pirates in the South China Sea in 1998, there have been dozens of piracy incidents in Australian waters. or on ships that set sail from those shores. So piracy is never something to disregard. But let's get back to digging the ocean floor. It turns out that harm to marine ecosystems isn't the only potential problem such work can create. There are frequent cases of underwater cables being damaged, which are almost completely severed when doing dredging. And if you damage such a cable, everyone will feel the effects. The thing is, 95% of global data is transmitted through 436 underwater cables with a total length of about 800,000 miles, connecting all continents except Antarctica. These cables carry the data necessary for the internet, communications, financial, and defense systems around the world. You could say that the modern world largely operates thanks to these giant wires on the ocean floor. And despite the fact that cables are clearly marked on nautical charts, about 70% of the damage is caused accidentally. Is it just as easy to dig in the wrong place by accident? Absolutely. Most countries view these international power cables in marine areas as critically important infrastructure, so they protect them. But incidents still happen. Even a slight damage to underwater cables can lead to a disruption in the internet connection, and serious damage can lead to major outages. By the way, damaging a cable can be very expensive for the one who caused the damage. Just a couple of months ago, a fishing trawler was sued to cover $800,000 in damages because it allegedly damaged an underwater fiber optic cable. This cable provided internet and phone service between Ireland and the UK, and fixing it turned out to be really costly. The ship was supposedly involved in scallop fishing, which includes dredging the seabed. The evidence is right there. And yep, in Australia, at that very place we're discussing throughout the whole video, cables also run through. And there's also another less obvious risk. Digging the seabed can result in an oil spill. In June this year in Singapore, a ship that was dredging the seabed suddenly had a breakdown in its engine and steering. It lost control, rammed into a cargo tanker, and caused a significant oil spill. Even though the leak was contained pretty fast, the tides carried the oil further down the coast, reaching a popular vacation island. And now imagine if something like that happened in Australia. Poor Great Barrier Reef. Let's hope there aren't any tankers around after all. Unexpected finds. To make room for the HMS Queen Elizabeth in the British port of Portsmouth, a total of 113 million cubic feet of sediment was removed, which is equivalent to 12,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The work was long, but what's interesting is not that. During the process, over 20,000 items were recovered, from a human skull to a German bomber engine. 8 cannons, 36 anchors, a British torpedo, a German sea mine, and 5 large bombs were also discovered. Many of the found items might have historical significance, and the skull was just handed over to the police. You never know. Plus 150 shopping trolleys. A similar story happened in the British city of Bath. The city's canal and river trust, carrying out dredging work, pulled out 150 shopping carts from the riverbed, as well as 6 cars, one of which had been in use for over 40 years. They also found bicycles and various other bits and pieces. The cleanup operation cost $25,700 and was ordered by the Environmental Protection Agency after the items were discovered. So at first they were just planning to dig out the riverbed, but who would have known there was a whole car fleet down there? Minus an excavator. Workers needed a weekend and 2 rescue trucks to pull out an excavator worth $132,000 after it sank in the middle of the harbor. What was the excavator even doing there? The 22-ton machine was used to remove excess silt from West Bay Harbor in Dorset, England. The work was done during low tide and the equipment just got stuck in the soft silt. A few workers and the crew from the West Bay port tried all day to pull out the excavator but were unsuccessful. Around 5 p.m., the tide started coming in and people had to give up. They just stood there watching as the excavator sank into the water. Fortunately, both excavator operators managed to get to safety. It took 2 days of effort and 2 rescue trucks to get the excavator out. The most amusing part is that this is the second time in 5 years that an excavator's been stuck in West Bay Harbor under similar conditions. Nesting break. The judge blocked the Army Corps of Engineers from doing dredging work this spring near Brunswick, North Carolina, because of the threat to sea turtle nesting. After a complaint from environmentalists, the authorities ruled dredging in the spring and summer is too dangerous for animals that are already endangered. Usually such work is done in winter to avoid disturbing nesting sea turtles. However, the military found an answer. They wanted to start digging in May to avoid the season when North Atlantic right whale calves appear. The season lasts from mid-November to April, and there are fewer than 400 whales left. Do you also feel that in this battle there's no winning? The timing is always wrong. However, no confirmed cases of harm to whales due to dredging have been recorded, but there's plenty of evidence of sea turtles dying from such activities, so the environmentalists still won. Better start digging. For centuries, dredging technology has been regularly used for clearing the rivers of the UK from silt, deepening channels, and helping the rivers function as they should. Yes, there are plenty of environmental nuances and other issues, but if this river cleaning isn't done, the consequences won't be long in coming. When Britain decided to leave the riverbeds alone and restore them to their untouched natural conditions, it turned out that the rivers couldn't handle the silt and other deposits on the bottom. Apparently, this led to destructive floods, much worse than those that happened before. Even though there's no 100% scientific proof that one thing led to another, the conclusions are pretty clear. It's also clear that the gray like button seems to be just asking to be turned black. So go ahead and click it if you watch the video to the end. See you later.